live now. Hello, everybody, again. I'm probably going to be quiet in this one because I'm sort of an introvert and I'm in a public place. So, there's the camera right there. This time, of course, more questions about prayer because, I guess half of the video is talking about prayer and, the one thing, okay. So here's something that I just realized recently is in the beginning when it describes the job of a man. The job of a man is to protect and over the physical plane. And then, of course, the realm of heaven is always God's realm. It's the realm that he's in charge of. And then this is how it was for pretty much, well, kind of. Many ancient religions had God's realm to be heaven, and then man could sometimes go into God's realm, like you see in the Epic of Gilgamesh. After Enkidu dies, he goes and searches for immortality, and he has to go into the realm of the gods, except the realm of the gods is on Earth somewhere, sort of like Mount Olympus is on Earth, but it's just higher. Um, but it's still sort of heaven. And then that's a place that people aren't generally allowed to go to, but Gilgamesh is Gilgamesh, so, he can do what he wants. So he goes up there, and, either way. What the Bible says is our position in the cosmos is that we are to guard, keep, and maintain Earth. And to me, this means we're not really going to know a ton about the spiritual world. And I don't know, this is something I've discovered sort of recently, but it makes perfect sense because, barely anything in the Bible talks about the spiritual world. There's every once in a while a prophet will have a vision and be like, whoa, there's the throne of God, and there are some weird Chinese dragons flying around him saying, holy, 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 with 6 wings and stuff. And that's really, it's, that's sort of it. That's all we know about the spiritual world. There's not a whole lot, and then, of course, the spiritual world is infinitely more vast and expansive than the physical world, apparently. I just got done saying there's not a ton we know about it, but it basically, how we would know that is because the spiritual world is the realm of God, and God is infinite, so, the spiritual world has to be infinite. So, that would be the basic logic there. But either way, we talked, I think I talked a little, there was an atheist that I was talking to recently online, and he was asking about the effects of prayer, interpersonal prayer, because interpersonal prayer is proven, it's beneficial, and every study proves this. But interpersonal prayer is sort of more on shaky ground, and I think the reason is because we try to test this stuff scientifically, but we come up with a few base assumptions that, there's going to be this benefit here every time that we pray if prayer works. But then that's not really what the Bible talks about. I think that prayer is something, and I think I've said this already in a previous video, but prayer is something that God controls. We don't control it. It's not some magical spell that we're able to cast and bring about our wishes, but it's something that God controls. And he will say no sometimes because he is a person. So it's almost like it's not like a natural law where you can drop a pen and every time it goes down because of gravity. It's more like a parent. Every time you ask for a toy, your parent doesn't say okay. Even if he has an infinite amount of money, which God in this scenario would, he doesn't every time say okay, because there are some things that it would be better for us if we don't have. And so it's sort of like that. So all of these questions seem to be about prayer so far. I know there are a couple other ones, but yeah. Anyway, the first question I'm going to answer is, will prayer ever bring back an amputated limb, make it regrow? Sure, why not? I don't see any reason to assume that it doesn't. Sure, there's a reason to doubt, but there's no reason to assume, because it's just it would just be an assumption, and you have to assume that God doesn't answer prayer in order to assume that that prayer wouldn't bring back an amputated limb. And have I ever seen it? No. I've heard stories, I guess. Then that goes into the next question, which is, if I've heard stories, why wasn't there ever a video camera to witness it? That's a good question. I don't know. And then that goes into the other one. Why isn't there ever a video camera there to witness a miracle? That's assuming that there isn't. I think nowadays with modern technology, there would be no way to tell whether or not something is a miracle or it's just made up. So really you have to get it within this short little time frame of, I think, 50 years of miraculous things happening, where those maybe even less than that, like 10 years, where cameras became available to everybody. After that, and then before the time when cameras, or when we were able to computer generate everything. Because if you even go back, like, I don't know, even back then, they had certain things that made things look real on camera. After color came out, of course. I don't even know, but either way, even if there was a camera to see it, there'd be no way of proving that it was a miracle. And then I suspect we'd be having the same issue, the same sort of question, if that sort of thing did happen. If we did catch it on camera, another question would arise: how do we know it's not computer generated? You see, with skepticism, it's something that can really just infinitely progress into more and more skepticism. You could be skeptical of the existence of the natural world as we see it, and I've done it, and is actually not unreasonable to do so. So that's one thing we could discuss some other time. But ultimately, with skepticism, you either are going to be perpetually skeptical. And I've never met a skeptic that is perpetually skeptical, because eventually they do believe in something, like they'll believe in science. And why do they believe in science? Well, because science is the study of the natural world. But they have to assume that the natural world exists the way that we see it. We have to assume that the natural world is experienced by everybody in the same way simultaneously, which is not, obviously. You could have one thing wrong with your senses, and you have issues with that, with everyone experiencing the natural world in the same ways. And so, yeah, and then of course science is not really the best form of evidence, because science is seeing evidence and then ascribing a story to it. And then, the best story sort of wins, and that's how it happens, or supposedly, hypothetically, that's how it happens. But, that's not always true, because depending on the story, especially if it's a story about history, or the history of the world, you can take any bit of evidence and sort of change the story around just a little bit to make that bit of evidence fit. And I've seen people do that on the young earth creationist side and the evolutionary biologist side. So it's like, if there's ever a bit of evidence that goes against your theory about the history of the world, no problem. Just tweak the story a little bit, you know. Um, and so that's really all science is. And then it's much different with the physical world as we see it today, because you can actually ascribe a story and you can see the story play out. But then I like how Ken Ham sort of differentiated between modern or science of today and then historical science, because really there is a difference. And we need to understand that the only reason Bill Nye said no was because obviously that would sort of undermine his argument, and he didn't want that. And the only reason any atheist says no to that is because, it undermines their whole scientific perspective, in a way, on history. Because it says that they're different, and they are. But either way, I don't know if I'm a young Earth creationist. I probably am not, because I don't really see any dilemma between the biblical narrative and deep space, or sorry, deep time. So, and then yeah, either way. So even a skeptic, or people who ascribe to be skeptical of things, they're only skeptical about things that challenge their own ideas already. Like if they're a skeptical atheist, then they only are skeptical of things that challenge their atheism. If they're a skeptical theist, like I am, then they're only skeptical about things that challenge their theism. And of course, that's not really how I am. I guess I should qualify that. They're more skeptical of things that would challenge the views that they already hold, and so that's probably more closer to the reality of things. But either way, and that just makes sense, because once you find a position, you guard that position, and I don't know, I think it's pretty close to psychologically impossible to actually be a true skeptic of everything, because he can't. It's just not feasible. Either way, back to the topic, prayer. Yeah, prayer. So there's no reason to believe that prayer is some sort of spell that you can just cast and then things happen. And have we seen miracles happen? I guess it would depend on how you define a miracle. If you use Hume's definition of a miracle, then no, because actually, if you take any sort of miracle and you ascribe a cause to it other than God, there you go. It's not a miracle anymore, because you can almost never see a complete, not hindrance. How did he describe it? It was a suspension of the laws of physics or the laws of nature. That is a miracle. So you can never see a suspension of the laws of nature and not change the story around to make it fit within the laws of nature, or to deny the authorship of God in that event. And so that's the issue again, is if you're skeptical about everything, that's you can do that. And so even if you do see a miracle, you can always just be like, well, I must be hallucinating, or well, I guess perhaps there is a non-zero possibility for this laptop to appear right over there on the other table. And that is just the way things are. But either way, amputated limb. Then the last one that I'm going to answer here is, what would help me more for a test, prayer or study? I've done both. They work about equally. Well, if you don't have time, or if you don't have the time to study, then prayer will work roughly equally when it comes to studying, at least in my experience. But that's only if you don't have the time to study. If you have the time to study, and you just choose not to do it, then prayer will probably not work as well, because God is a person, and if you are irresponsible, he will make you regret it. not make you regret it. You'll just regret it, and he'll let you regret it. So yeah. I guess my challenge to atheists again is the same challenge a few videos ago. Why do you assume that we know anything about prayer or the spiritual world at all? Because we don't. So these questions about prayer or the studies about prayer really just show nothing, because you have no idea if you're even testing the right thing. So yeah, I guess that's it. And then I guess another challenge is, why are so many of these questions about prayer? Because you know nothing about prayer. We know nothing about prayer. We just know that sometimes it works. Because we assume that every time it works, but sometimes we get what we want when it does work. And so that's the distinction there. Okay. Well, I'm going to go now. Hopefully you guys could actually hear me, because I am talking a little quietly. How do I... there we go. Bye!